My
I'm so
landlady
glad you're
said my
here.
presence was
Me
worth
too.
more than my rent,
This
and I
feels
couldn't
nice.
stop thinking about her. I had never thought that paying rent could feel dangerous. The first time I saw her, she was standing in the hallway of my small, slightly run-down apartment building, a folder tucked under her arm. One brow arched like she already knew everything about me. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s, hair streaked with silver in the way that made it look deliberate, not tired. She had that calm authority that could make you feel exposed without a word. And yet, when she smiled at me, the corners of her eyes crinkling just enough to hint at mischief, my chest tightened in a way I didn't understand. "I see you've been punctual," she said, voice smooth, almost teasing. "But it's not the money I mind so much, it's the absence." I blinked, caught off guard. Absence? My presence? I wasn't sure if I was flattered or embarrassed, or both. Her name was Claudia. She was my landlady, but there was a softness beneath the professional veneer, the kind that whispered promises without saying anything concrete. I, 24, freshly out of college and still fumbling through life like a man half-grown, had moved into her building because I could afford it, and because I needed the quiet. Yet, as I unpacked my boxes in the dim light of the tiny kitchen, I found myself replaying that smile over and over. Something about it felt like a challenge, like a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I kept my hands busy, pretending not to notice how often I glanced toward her door as she went about the evening, the faint sound of her heels on the hallway tile echoing in my chest. Claudia had a way of appearing in the apartment doorway without warning. Once, I caught her looking over a stack of my unopened letters, and when our eyes met, she didn't apologize. She just smiled, slightly crooked, and said, "Curiosity is a form of care, isn't it?" I had never known anyone who could make casual observation feel intimate, invasive in the best way. I wanted to speak, to say something witty, but the words caught somewhere between my throat and my stomach. I was younger, yes, but there was something about her presence that made me aware of every careless movement I made, every unnecessary gesture, every fleeting thought that slipped onto my face. Dinner that night was quiet. I cooked, she didn't. I kept my back to her, pretending to stir sauce while stealing glimpses of her from the corner of my eye. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral but not overpowering, drifted through the apartment and lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. She hummed softly while reading a letter, completely unaware, or maybe completely aware, of the effect she had. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance that somehow felt too large despite the fact that we were in the same room. But instead, I chopped vegetables a little harder than necessary, my jaw tight, my palms slick. Then, just as I was reaching for the spice rack, she glanced at me with that same inscrutable smile. "You pay rent on time," she said, voice lower this time, closer, "but your presence is worth more." The words hit me in the chest like a small, unexpected storm. I swallowed, unsure if I was supposed to answer, retreat, or simply meld into the floor. And before I could process anything, the sound of the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent, cutting through the quiet like a crack of lightning. Claudia didn't move immediately. She just looked at me, her smile lingering, her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of anticipation or warning. I stood frozen, knives in hand, as the unexpected interruption pressed between us like a weight. My heart was racing, but it wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else, something dangerous, something unspoken, and entirely irresistible. The moment stretched. I wanted to speak, to ask who it was, but my voice stuck. And Claudia, she just waited, that same mysterious curve of her lips, as if daring me to cross a line I didn't even know existed yet. The doorbell had stopped ringing by the time I finally worked up the nerve to reach it. No one was there, just a plain envelope slid under the threshold. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against hers as I bent to retrieve it. That accidental touch sent a jolt through me, sharper than any alarm. Claudia's eyes lingered on my hand longer than necessary, a shadow of a smile teasing the corners of her mouth. She had lived in this building for years. Everyone knew her as the reliable, organized landlady. But beneath the polished exterior, there were cracks I could sense without seeing. Once, she'd casually mentioned a divorce from a long-ago husband, her words clipped, as if carefully edited to remove emotion. I caught the faint tremor in her hands when she spoke, a betrayal of some old grief she never fully addressed. Her ex had left her, she had said, for someone younger. Though she never said it aloud, she didn't need to. I had noticed the way her jaw tightened at the memory, how her eyes flickered to the floor when she thought no one was watching. Me? I carried my own history, though lighter in comparison. I had broken up with someone I loved last year, too young, too reckless to see it through. That failure had left a hollow ache that I tried to fill with work, with small routines, with living quietly. Yet here, in her presence, all the careful distance I had constructed seemed pointless. Every glance, every unintentional brush of our arms reminded me that I had no control over this pull toward her. It was dangerous, of course. I knew the world would see it as inappropriate. She was older, experienced, a woman who commanded respect. I was young, naive in comparison, and utterly reckless when it came to my emotions. And yet, the thought of resisting her felt like denying air to my lungs. That evening, I found her on the balcony, the city lights reflecting softly in her eyes. I joined her, unsure if I had the right. Silence hung between us like a tangible weight, heavy but comforting. I remembered the time I had accidentally overheard her humming a tune she claimed to dislike, and she had pretended I hadn't heard it. I smiled at the memory. She caught my gaze and held it, neither of us speaking. I wanted to say something, to confess the storm inside me, but the words seemed clumsy, inadequate. Instead, I offered her a hand, tentative. She didn't move immediately, just let her fingers hover near mine, as if deciding if it was safe to trust them with me. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she intertwined them with mine. A shiver ran up my arm, and I saw the same flicker in her eyes I had glimpsed before. Hesitation, curiosity, desire. It wasn't reckless. Not yet. It was the quiet acknowledgement of something forbidden but intoxicating, the kind of connection that didn't need words. For a moment, the world fell away. The city buzzed below, the hum of life distant and irrelevant. There was just her, just me, and a shared pulse of unspoken longing. I realized then that whatever waited ahead, risks, mistakes, judgment, it was already too late. We had already crossed some invisible line, one we couldn't name, one we couldn't unfeel. The wind carried a faint laugh from the street below. Claudia tilted her head toward me, her lips twitching in a way that promised mischief and maybe, just maybe, something more. The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of our hands brushing on the balcony. Every time I tried to focus on breakfast, the sensation of her fingers against mine lingered, stubborn and impossible to ignore. I told myself to stop, to keep a proper distance, but the sight of her moving through the apartment, casually humming while sorting papers, made me question every rule I'd set for myself. And then came the knock. Sharp, impatient. My roommate, Marco, stood in the doorway with an expression that said he already suspected something, though I had no idea what. "Dude," he said, leaning against the frame, "are you serious?" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I froze, heart hammering. I had barely processed my own feelings, let alone anyone else knowing. Claudia appeared behind him, her expression unreadable, though I caught the faintest flicker of surprise. Then something else. Guarded. "I didn't realize you two had company," she said, voice calm, but the slight tightness in her jaw betrayed her. She lingered near the doorway, longer than necessary, as if measuring the tension. Marco finally left, muttering something about errands, but the air between us had shifted. The apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. I wanted to retreat, to apologize, to vanish, but my feet didn't move. Neither did hers. Later that afternoon, I found her in the kitchen again, making tea. She turned as I entered, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. The room was quiet except for the faint hiss of boiling water. "You're thinking about him," she said suddenly, her tone teasing, accusatory but not angry. I blinked. "What?" "No." Her eyes narrowed, almost playful. Your roommate. You're worried what he thinks. And me. I swallowed. She was right. Of course, she was right. But the truth was more complicated than either of us could say aloud. It wasn't just Marco. It wasn't just appearances. It was the sheer weight of what this meant. What we were doing simply by existing in the same room, touching hands, sharing a glance too long. She took a step closer, the steam from the kettle curling between us like a curtain. My pulse spiked, and I knew I shouldn't, but I wanted to. We both did. The almost kiss from the balcony hovered in my memory, teasing me, daring us. Then she stopped, just inches from my face, and her hand hovered near mine on the counter. She didn't move away, but she didn't close the distance either. Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. I shouldn't, she whispered, almost to herself. And yet, there was a tremor in her voice, a quiet invitation wrapped in hesitation. I wanted to argue, to pull her closer, to finally give in, but guilt curled in my stomach like a snake. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, wanted the same, but the words were tangled in fear, restraint, and the knowledge that the world would judge. And then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just 4 words, she's not alone. My chest tightened. Claudia's eyes met mine, wide and alert. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. And yet, the invisible thread between us had tightened, pulling us closer against our own will. The apartment felt smaller than ever that evening, the lights dim, shadows stretching along the walls like fingers. Claudia was at her desk, papers scattered, but her posture was taut, unreadable. I perched on the edge of the sofa, pretending to scroll through my phone, though every nerve in my body was tuned to her. Then came the sound of her laughter from the balcony. My stomach dropped. A man's voice, a neighbor, a tenant, someone I didn't know, laughing with her. I hadn't realized how possessive I could feel until that moment. My hand tightened around my phone as jealousy twisted into something sharp and unfamiliar. I wanted to storm out, to accuse, to demand, but I stayed. Watching, waiting. Claudia came back inside, closing the balcony door softly. Her hair caught the light in a way that made it shimmer. She looked at me, directly, and something in her expression shifted. Guilt? Concern? Desire? I couldn't read it, and that made it worse. I didn't think you'd notice, she said, voice low, almost teasing. But there was an edge to it, a crack in her usual composure. I noticed, I admitted before I could stop myself. I don't like the idea of anyone else. My words faltered. I wasn't even sure what I was saying. That I didn't like the thought of her with someone else? That I was more invested than I should be? That I was young and reckless and utterly trapped by my own feelings? She stood up, slowly, moving closer. The air between us was charged, every unspoken word hanging like a live wire. Her hand hovered near mine, fingers twitching almost imperceptibly. You're afraid of me? She asked softly. Her eyes searched mine, holding me accountable for emotions I hadn't fully acknowledged. No, I said, but it wasn't true. I was afraid of losing her, afraid of what this connection could do to both of us, afraid of crossing lines we shouldn't. Yet the desire in me refused to let go. Her breath caught. You think I'm dangerous. I wanted to nod, wanted to admit everything. My longing, my obsession, my foolish heart. But instead I stayed silent, letting the confession linger in the air. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to reach out, to touch her, to bridge the impossible gap between us. And then she stepped even closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough that our knees brushed. Her gaze dropped, then lifted, daring me, teasing me, inviting something we both knew we shouldn't take yet. I shouldn't want this, she whispered, almost more to herself than to me. I shouldn't either, I said, my voice rough. But my fingers itched to reach for hers. My body ached for the nearness I could barely endure. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The hum of the city, the distant sirens, the echoes of laughter, they were irrelevant. There was only her, only me, only the unspoken storm coiling tighter and tighter between us. And then the sound of a key turning in the lock downstairs, the unmistakable jingle of someone entering the building. We froze, eyes locking, breath shallow, hearts hammering. The tension snapped taut, and suddenly, everything we tried to resist threatened to break loose. The key in the lock rattled again, and Claudia and I froze, hearts hammering. I swallowed, certain it was just someone entering the building. But then her phone buzzed, a single message preview lighting up the screen. "I know what's going on between you two. Meet me downstairs." Her hand trembled slightly as she read it. I wanted to snatch the phone, but she held it tight, pale and unreadable. "It's Marco," she whispered, voice clipped. "He saw us on the balcony." I felt my stomach drop. Marco, my roommate. He hadn't just suspected. He'd witnessed something, and now he was threatening to expose it. The thought of our secret unraveling, of judgment, of whispers echoing through the building, made my chest tighten. Claudia ran a hand through her hair, pacing a small circle. I thought we were careful. I thought I could. Her voice cracked. "You're fine," I said, trying to steady her, trying to steady myself. But I didn't feel fine. I could see it in her posture, the tension, the panic, the sudden sharpness in her eyes. She had worked so hard to control everything in her life, and now she looked like someone unraveling in real time. "I can't let him," she began, then stopped. Her lips pressed together, jaw tight. She glanced at me, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. If Marco decided to tell anyone, everything we were building, everything we couldn't even name yet, would be exposed. I wanted to argue, to insist he wouldn't, but it wasn't my choice. And that realization, that our connection, fragile and forbidden, could be ripped apart by a single careless observation, hit harder than I expected. Then Claudia did something that made my heart stop. She stepped toward me, brushing her fingers against my chest lightly, almost apologetically. "We can't pretend anymore," she said, voice low. "But we also can't risk it. Not yet." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve, then back at me, eyes fierce and vulnerable all at once. "We need to face him, together. Decide what this is or what it isn't. But hiding isn't working." I felt a mix of fear, exhilaration, and longing swirl in my chest. Every instinct screamed to pull her close, to erase the distance and risk it all. But another part, the cautious, younger part of me, warned against it. Before I could respond, Claudia's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Marco. "Now, don't ignore me." Her breath hitched. My pulse raced. We were at the edge, between confession and disaster, desire and judgment. Claudia's fingers found mine. She didn't say anything, but the pressure, subtle yet deliberate, spoke volumes. We both knew what we were risking. We both knew how much was at stake. And then, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, someone descending deliberately, decisively, echoed through the apartment building. I looked at her, and she looked at me. No words, just the undeniable understanding that whatever happened next would change everything. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder, deliberate, each tap a drumbeat in my chest. Claudia's hand tightened around mine, not letting go, as if she knew. No, we knew. There was no turning back. Marco appeared in the doorway first, eyebrows raised, an accusatory edge to his gaze. But before he could speak, Claudia stepped forward, chest slightly puffed, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "This isn't your business," she said, voice low but unwavering. "And you're not going to decide what happens here." Marco opened his mouth, hesitated, and then shrugged. Something in her stance, in the way she wasn't pleading or explaining, made him pause. He muttered something about needing to go, his anger muffled, then left. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed down the hall, leaving a heavy quiet in his wake. We stood there, heartbeats echoing in sync, the apartment suddenly too small, too intimate, too charged. My hand still in hers, I realized I didn't want to pull away, not now, not ever. The fear, the risk, all of it didn't matter anymore. "I'm tired of hiding," I said finally, voice rough, shaky. I want this. You. I don't care what anyone thinks. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, then closed. Her hand slid higher, brushing against my chest again, lingering, a quiet invitation. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable, but alight with something fierce. I shouldn't, she whispered, almost to herself. But I can't stop thinking about you. About us. That was all I needed. I stepped closer, closing the space between us. She didn't retreat. Her fingers threaded through mine as if to anchor herself, to make sure this wasn't a dream. And then we were there, just inches apart. Every inhale shared, every heartbeat a drum of possibility. I wanted to lean in, to claim the words and the kiss I'd been holding back for months, but something in the pause mattered. The hesitation, the fragile tension, the fact that this moment had been earned, not stolen. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, questioning, daring me. Are you sure? She whispered. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. She swallowed, a faint tremor running through her. And then, in that suspended moment, we finally let ourselves breathe in the weight of what had been building. Longing, guilt, regret, fear, all coiling into something real, something undeniably ours. The apartment was quiet again. The city hummed beyond the walls. We didn't move yet, just held the space between us, fingertips brushing, breaths mingling. Words weren't necessary. We understood. Whatever came next, the judgment, the complications, the consequences, we would face it together. And for the first time, I believed that we could. The only sound was her soft sigh, a mix of relief, desire, and something tender I couldn't name. My thumb brushed hers, a silent promise. We weren't kissing yet, not fully, but the line had been crossed, and nothing would be the same again. And for the first time, I didn't want it to be. Days passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. The city moved on outside, indifferent, but inside our little apartment, time felt different, slower, charged, intimate. Claudia and I settled into a rhythm that wasn't just about living together, but about navigating this fragile, new connection. She would make tea in the morning, humming softly, and I would sit nearby, pretending to read, but really just watching the way sunlight caught her hair, the way her fingers lingered over the mug as if she could imprint warmth into it. I noticed everything. Her subtle smiles, the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was looking, the quiet sighs that seemed to carry unspoken confessions. And she noticed me too. Not just my presence, but my hesitations, my long glances, the way I lingered on her words, absorbing every detail as though committing it to memory. There was no rush between us anymore, no dangerous hovering at the edge. We were careful, yes, but deliberate. A conversation over coffee could stretch into an hour because neither of us wanted to break the spell of presence, of attention, of connection. One evening, the apartment was quiet. The city lights flickered through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. Claudia sat across from me, a half-read book in her hands, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No teasing, no hesitation, no fear, just the acknowledgement of what we had chosen, what we had survived, what we had created together. I never thought this, she said softly, that I could let myself be this vulnerable and still feel safe. I reached across the small table, brushing my fingers against hers. Neither did I admitted, but I think we're better for it. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Better together? Better together, I echoed, my voice steady, sure. And in that shared, quiet agreement, everything settled. Not perfectly, not without the scars or the history that shaped us, but settled enough to breathe, to laugh, to touch hands without hesitation, to exist in a space where longing had turned into mutual understanding. We didn't need words for the rest. The apartment, once a backdrop for tension and stolen glances, had become a home, a witness to a story we had written together, page by page, emotion by emotion. The danger was gone, not because the world had changed, but because we had chosen each other anyway. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how much I had grown, how much she had taught me about patience, attention, and the courage to embrace something that felt impossible. And I knew she felt the same, That love, in all its messy, human imperfection, was finally ours. Outside, the city continued to hum, but inside, we had found quiet. Not the absence of chaos, but the presence of something real. And I thought, maybe this was what it meant to be truly seen. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? If you love this slow burn romance and want more emotional, real, adult love stories, subscribe to the channel now and never miss a moment of heartfelt storytelling.